Welcome to Mindset Matters Book Club YouTube channel. Please subscribe and like to hear new book summaries. We are diving deep into a remarkable book today that provides what we genuinely believe is the essential shortcut to living well.
It really is.
This book, it just cuts through the deafening noise of the modern wellness world and strips away all these layers of confusion, simplifying everything you thought you knew about maximizing your time on this planet.
It's a necessary perspective, I think. I mean,
Yeah.
if you're a curious person right now trying to navigate the overwhelming stream of conflicting health advice.
It's everywhere.
It's on your social feed, it's in complex medical journals, and you are just drowning in conflicting data points.
Absolutely. To illustrate that confusion, we were talking to a few people recently, and the perfect example came up. It's the alcohol debate.
Well, that's always a hot one.
Right. So I was speaking with a friend who is over 50. She's disciplined, eats well, and she loves her occasional social drink. You know, a glass of wine with friends over dinner, maybe a rare cocktail.
And she's citing all those older studies, I'm sure, the ones that suggest, light consumption, especially with meals, might have some small cardiovascular benefits.
Exactly. That's her argument. She says the social benefit alone is worth the small risk, especially for someone in her age bracket.
And you inevitably had someone standing right there, ready to tell her she was poisoning herself.
100%. The woman next to her completely abstains. She quit entirely after getting COVID, said it changed her sense of taste.
Okay.
And she insists she feels significantly better, more energy, lost some weight, her sleep improved dramatically. And they both looked at us, essentially asking us to adjudicate, to tell them which one of them was right.
And that anxiety, that desperate need to know the right answer to such a small fractional detail, that is the core problem this book addresses. We can't adjudicate those minute details because, like you said, every study seems to conflict, especially with something as divisive and, socially embedded as alcohol. The book's author, who's a physician and a bioethicist, advises us to just stop obsessing over those tiny incremental adjustments.
He provides this ultimate and really kind of philosophical hook right at the start. It's wonderfully blunt, and it just instantly reframes the entire discussion.
He calls it the first rule of life, and it's an unavoidable truth. We're all going to die.
Simple as that.
The goal, therefore, isn't to waste precious time and mental bandwidth worrying about tiny tweaks that might perhaps extend your life by a few minutes. The real mission is to focus on maximizing the health, the vigor, and the meaning of the time you already have guaranteed.
That philosophical stance is so powerful because it just pulls the rug out from under the entire modern longevity expert industry.
Oh, absolutely.
That industry often frames life as some kind of competition where the gold medal goes to the oldest person in the room. This author fundamentally rejects that competitive, anxiety-driven mindset.
Precisely. Life is not a contest to outlive everyone else. Wellness, the pursuit of health, is simply a means to a greater end.
Which is?
A healthy, fulfilling, and purposeful life. Wellness is the engine, it's not the destination.
So we're going to unpack this refreshingly simple, evidence-based approach that focuses squarely on quality of life, not just calendar years. The author distills all the existing research from massive longitudinal studies to, cutting-edge neuroscience into just 6 straightforward, high-impact behaviors.
And this is where it gets really interesting and where we need to slow down a little to appreciate the significance.
I agree.
We'll cover why 3 of those behaviors, the social and psychological ones, have a measurably greater impact on your overall wellness and longevity than the 3 physical ones we usually obsess over.
The ones we always talk about: diet, exercise, and sleep.
Exactly. But first, let's dive into that philosophy, because understanding the historical context of the wellness obsession is critical before we get to the 6 behaviors themselves.
Okay, let's unpack this contemporary anxiety.
First, we need to acknowledge just how far we've come. I mean, historically speaking, Americans already live quite long lives. Before the Civil War, life expectancy in the U.S. was a mere 39.4 years.
Wow. It's hard to even imagine that.
It is. By the turn of the 20th century, it was up to 48.2 years. And today, despite some recent setbacks like the opioid crisis, suicide rates, the impact of COVID, the average life expectancy hovers around 78.6 years.
That's a massive increase in a relatively short span of time. We've nearly doubled our average life expectancy in about 150 years.
Mostly thanks to sanitation, vaccines, and antibiotics. Really basic public health stuff.
Right.
And when you look at the successful outliers, the numbers are even more impressive. The longest-lived 20% of Americans, so the ones who have managed their health relatively well, have an average lifespan of 93 years.
93.
And the longest-lived 40% reach over 88. So the question shouldn't be, can we live long? But why this massive anxiety-driven obsession with constantly pushing that ceiling higher, often through really complex and expensive means?
The book pins the start of the modern sort of consumerist wellness movement to 1979, right?
Yes. That was the year a 60-minute segment aired with Mike Wallace, where he called wellness a word that Americans don't hear every day. That specific segment launched the concept into the American mainstream. It catalyzed the massive explosion we see today, the products, the retreats, the endless stream of supplements, and this obsession with optimization.
And the book argues that this obsession is turbocharged by a very modern kind of anxiety, this feeling that we've lost control over the big things.
That's the critical sociological insight. When the world feels inherently unpredictable and out of your control, we're talking about massive shifts like political polarization, climate change, gilded age-level income inequality, and the profound existential worry about AI transforming the workforce.
When you can't control the outside world.
You grasp desperately for something you can assert control over, your own internal health metrics.
It's a very human response, isn't it? If I can't fix the global economy, at least I can optimize my micronutrient intake and make sure my mitochondria are in peak condition.
And that dynamic is perfectly illustrated by the rise of the wellness influencer. The book uses this stark example, a hypothetical one, of the 2025 Surgeon General promoting mitochondrial health gummies and immunity stacks.
The confident recitation of academic terms, things that sound incredibly complicated but don't necessarily translate into high-impact, actionable health gains for the average person.
Correct. Her rise, as the book notes, is emblematic of a culture where this confident, articulate recitation of academic-sounding evidence, regardless of its ultimate efficacy, can lead to fame and massive influence. It shows how the wellness movement has become saturated with complex, consumerist, and often really low-impact advice.
What's so fascinating here is that the essence of wellness isn't a new discovery at all. The book stresses that ancient wisdom already knew the core truths.
We have to remember how little the human body has changed in 2,500 years. Hippocrates, way back then, advocated for good diet and exercise. His core insight was so simple. If we give everyone the right amount of nourishment and exercise, not too little, not too much, we find the safest path to health.
And Aristotle was talking about friends.
At around the same time, Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics was emphasizing the importance of close friends for a healthy, fulfilling, and virtuous life.
So we've taken these simple, time-tested, ancient concepts, eat moderately, move your body, have friends, and just wrap them in a labyrinth of supplements, diagnostic protocols, and tracking devices.
And in doing so, modern advice often loses the most critical half of the equation. Most wellness gurus, they fixate exclusively on the physical components, eating, exercising, and sleeping perfectly.
And those are vital, to be clear.
Absolutely, they are vital, but there are only 3 pieces of a 6-piece puzzle.
And the book's core evidence-based argument is that the other 3 pillars, the social and psychological ones, are actually the most important for your quality of life and longevity.
That's the key synthesis. The 6 simple behaviors are divided into 2 triads. The physical triad is diet, exercise, and sleep. The social and mental triad is risk management, friendship and social interactions, and mental engagement. And the data consistently shows that the social and psychological components have a measurably greater impact on your wellness than the 3 physical ones.
Let's get that list out right now because it provides the structure for the rest of our deep dive. What are the 6 behaviors that yield maximum benefits with the least amount of, that exhaustive, anxiety-inducing work?
Okay, here they are. 1, don't be a schmuck. That means avoid self-destructive, high-impact risks. 2, talk to people. Cultivate deep social relations. 3, expand your mind. Stay mentally sharp and curious.
And then the physical ones.
4, eat your ice cream. Consume healthy food and drink in moderation. 5, move it. Actually exercise well and regularly. And 6, sleep like a baby. Get the restorative rest you need.
That list is wonderfully succinct, and it immediately helps us disentangle the goal. The book clarifies that we shouldn't confuse wellness, which is a process, with happiness, which is a state of being.
This takes us back to wisdom, not metrics. Eleanor Roosevelt's famous quote is perfect here. Happiness is not a goal. It's a byproduct of a life well lived.
I love that.
Wellness practices are simply the stable, healthy foundation that allows that well-lived life to flourish.
And crucially, chasing those perfect, arbitrary metrics, monitoring every step, every minute of sleep, every calorie, it causes the very thing we're trying to avoid: chronic stress.
Chronic stress is the essence of anti-wellness. It's a biological disaster. It leads to systemic long-term inflammation, which makes you susceptible to infection. It impairs brain function, it induces depression, and it demonstrably accelerates premature aging.
And one of the biggest stressors for health-conscious people is treating every single choice, every skipped gym session, every bite of dessert as a life or death decision. That worry, that hypervigilance is just counterproductive.
It is. This is where the Blue Zones model serves as the perfect living example of this philosophy in action.
Right, the places like Okinawa in Japan, Sardinia in Italy.
Exactly. The inhabitants in these famous longevity zones routinely live to 90 or 100, remaining cognitively intact and physically active without ever obsessing over complex metrics or constant fractional adjustments.
They aren't maximizing longevity, they are simply living rich, active, healthy lives that are socially connected.
That's the key. They incorporate accessible, easy, and impactful lifestyle choices, balanced meals, natural daily movement, regular socialization, seamlessly into their daily schedule. The 6 simple behaviors are built into the fabric of their daily life, often unconsciously.
It's not about agonizing willpower.
No, or endless monitoring. It's about ingrained habit, routine, and above all, meaning.
Okay, now that we have the philosophical context, quality matters more than quantity, let's jump into the first pillar, and perhaps the most blunt. Pillar 1, don't be a schmuck.
This concept is so essential because it forces you to focus on eliminating catastrophic risks, the boring foundational essentials, before you waste time worrying about expensive fads.
The author uses a fantastic anecdote to illustrate this. It was about buying his first car, a used Volvo for $300.
Right. He and his brother were so excited by the polished exterior and the fact that they got their dream car that they completely neglected to check the reverse gear.
Which, of course,
predictably didn't work. They were so distracted by the superficial details, the paint, the stereo, that they overlooked a basic, essential functionality. So in health terms, a schmuck move means overlooking those foundational safety rules in favor of fads, making high-risk choices that lead to serious, irreversible harm.
So we're talking about risks that result in death, debilitating injury, brain damage, paralysis.
Or just losing the ability to live consciously and deliberately. You don't need to live in a protective bubble, but you do need to minimize the risks of major permanent harm.
Like the scooter example he uses.
Exactly. Electric scooters are popular, accidents are rising, but you can minimize the risk of a traumatic brain injury by simply wearing a helmet and avoiding dangerous conditions like riding at night or on slick roads. You mitigate the risk, you don't have to eliminate the activity entirely.
So what are the major high-impact risks that people commonly overlook or consciously ignore today?
The first, and hands down the worst, is smoking.
It is genuinely astonishing that in an era of such high health awareness, it's still such a colossal factor.
It is the ultimate schmuck move. On average, smokers lose a staggering 10 to 13 years of life compared to non-smokers. It's estimated that each cigarette shortens your life by about 20 minutes.
But there is good news here. It's a massive motivator, which is that quitting works even later in life.
It really does. Quitting by age 44 adds back an average of 9 years to your life expectancy.
And there was a specific piece of research on cardiovascular risk that was really encouraging.
Yes. A 2024 South Korean study found that for those who smoked for less than 8 years after they quit, their subsequent risk of cardiovascular disease returned to the same level as never smokers. The body is resilient, but you have to stop the damage.
But quitting is notoriously difficult. The addiction is biological, psychological, and socially reinforced.
It is incredibly hard. Clinical research, particularly out of Canada, suggests it takes 30 or more attempts for the average person to successfully quit for good.
30. Wow.
The famous cold turkey success story, President Dwight Eisenhower, who quit 4 packs a day in his late 50s and lived to 78, was highly exceptional. He even had this peculiar habit of stuffing his pockets with cigarettes and just giving them away to feel a strange kind of psychological superiority over the addiction.
That's a fascinating insight into the psychology of control, tying back to our earlier point about anxiety. So for the rest of us, what is the proven strategic pathway for cessation?
The book outlines a 4-step proven strategy. First, plan by setting a firm quit date and sticking to it. Second, Identify and meticulously avoid all your environmental triggers bars, coffee breaks, socializing with smoking friends, specific stressful situations.
And third is using medical aids.
Right. Nicotine replacement therapy like patches or gum or non-nicotine drugs.
And we should probably just briefly mention the difference between those two main non-nicotine drugs, since people might have heard the name.
Certainly. The two most common are bupropion, which is an antidepressant initially that works by reducing cravings and withdrawal symptoms. Then there is varenicline, which works by partially stimulating the nicotine receptors in the brain, which reduces the pleasure of smoking while also easing withdrawal. They are medically proven to work.
And the fourth and perhaps most critical step.
Get social support. Call in the reinforcements from family, friends, or formal support groups. Since social support is one of our most important pillars of wellness, integrating that network into your cessation plan is vital for long-term success.
Now, let's address the massive contemporary controversy of swapping one bad habit for another, the vaping discussion. Many people see it as the optimal cessation aid.
This is a textbook example of conflicting and confusing data. It really depends on geography and context. On one hand, you have British researchers, specifically the Cochrane Review, who found that vaping was statistically better than other forms of nicotine replacement therapy.
How much better?
It helped an additional 4 people per 100 smokers successfully quit. This evidence led the British government to officially support vaping as a harm reduction tool.
But the U.S. government is very skeptical and refuses to approve it for cessation. Why the divergence?
Because real-world U.S. data suggests it's not working as intended. The FDA and the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force have not approved e-cigarettes for cessation because U.S. studies found that vaping was often additive.
So people were doing both.
Yes. Smokers who used e-cigarettes were no more likely to quit than those who didn't. And even worse, subsequent research showed that smokers trying to quit, who also vaped, actually ended up smoking traditional cigarettes about 15% longer. They doubled their exposure.
So treating a known massive harm for an unknown emerging harm is still fundamentally a schmuck move.
That's the bottom line. And the health risks of vaping itself are starting to emerge, even if presented as less severe than smoking. They carry definite health risks beyond the addictive nicotine.
Such as?
Vaping is associated with emphysema, and the impact on young, developing brains is particularly alarming. College students who vaped scored measurably lower on tests of learning, memory, problem-solving, and critical thinking than their non-vaping peers.
And it acts as a gateway.
Exactly. It normalizes the act of smoking for youth who might never have otherwise started.
Okay, moving on to another substance whose social and legal acceptance is changing rapidly: chronic cannabis use. Today's product is not the same as the 1960s version.
That's the key context. Today's weed is far more potent. It often has about 3 times more THC than the marijuana used decades ago. And while the book acknowledges that occasional recreational use is likely low risk, chronic use, meaning daily or near daily use over years, has 3 major downsides that fall squarely into the schmuck move category.
The first being the addiction risk itself.
Yes. Despite older cultural claims that pot wasn't addictive, the risk today is estimated at 10% of adult users. That risk nearly doubles, rising to 17% if you start using before the brain is fully developed, typically before age 18.
And the second immediate concern is safety.
Right, particularly related to driving. Some studies estimate about 1,400 annual deaths from traffic accidents can be attributed to cannabis use since legalization, largely due to impaired reaction time and attention.
And the third, long-term cognitive impact, is perhaps the most serious from a wellness perspective, as it ties directly into our pillar on expanding the mind.
Absolutely. The chronic, heavy use of high-potency cannabis is genuinely bad for the brain's functionality. A highly respected 45-year longitudinal study from New Zealand found that long-term chronic cannabis users showed an average IQ decline of about 5.5 points from childhood into midlife.
5.5 points is significant.
It is. Along with poorer learning and processing speed, it essentially links chronic use to early cognitive impairment, making people noticeably slower, less able to focus, and less effective at memory formation. And on top of that, there are serious risks with use during pregnancy, including low birth weight and preeclampsia.
Now, alcohol. We started with the social confusion around it, but the book notes that for younger people, the answer is remarkably clear.
It is. Alcohol is, simply put, the leading risk factor for death for men aged 15 to 48. Whether through accidents, violence, or early disease, it is the #1 killer in that cohort. Therefore, the safest level of drinking for anyone under the age of 40 is unequivocally none.
But for older adults, the situation gets mucky.
For adults over 40, the calculus changes slightly. Some studies do suggest that light consumption around 1 to 1.5 standard drinks a day may offer marginal cardiovascular disease benefits, possibly due to changes in HDL cholesterol or blood thinning.
But this is where the World Health Organization steps in with an extremely strong counterpoint that reestablishes the severity of the risk.
Exactly. WHO points out that whatever marginal cardiovascular benefits might exist are thoroughly outweighed by the cancer risk associated with those same consumption levels.
And it's not just one or two types of cancer?
No. Alcohol is causally linked to 7 different types, including breast, liver, esophagus, and colon cancer. The WHO's ultimate conclusion is that there is no safe level of alcohol consumption in terms of eliminating all health risk.
So if the data suggests no safe level, how do we reconcile the book's recommendation that occasional social drinks are acceptable?
Because of the behavioral and social benefits. This is a classic example of balancing the 6 pillars. Residents in the blue zones regularly tipple a little with meals. The immeasurable benefits of regularly socializing with friends, which we'll dedicate an entire pillar to, strongly outweigh the marginal cancer risk of an occasional social drink.
So the key is moderation.
Strict moderation. Avoid heavy drinking. Absolutely avoid binge drinking. And critically, never drink alone. Drinking alone is reliably linked to increased risk of dependence and is always a bad idea.
And if you do drink socially, we have to hammer home the ultimate immediate schmuck move, drinking and driving.
This is a risk factor with zero social or wellness benefit. Even at 0.05% BAC, which is below the federal limit, a driver has a 38% higher risk of an accident than a non-drinker. At the federal limit of 0.08%, that risk triples.
Just don't do it.
If you drive, don't drink. Full stop. And while we're on driving, texting while driving is arguably even worse, increasing your crash risk 23-fold. Put the phone out of arm's reach before you start the car.
Let's cover sun exposure and cancer screening before we leave these high-impact risks. The sun is necessary for mood and vitamin D, but excessive exposure is pure schmuckery.
We need about 10 to 30 minutes of natural sunlight daily, especially in the morning. It helps regulate our crucial circadian rhythm and produce vitamin D. But beyond that, excessive UV exposure is the primary cause of melanomas and premature aging.
And there's a persistent anti-science misinformation campaign around sunscreen that needs to be debunked.
It's shocking. About 14% of adults under 35 have somehow been led to believe that wearing sunscreen is more dangerous than direct sun exposure.
Where does that come from?
It stems from misinterpreted animal studies focused on ingredients like oxybenzone, which showed negative effects when fed to rats in extremely high doses. As the book rightly points out, you are not a rat, and you'd have to use sunscreen for approximately 200 years to reach a human equivalent of that exposure level.
Whereas the benefit is immediate and proven.
Demonstrably. Sunscreen with an SPF over 30 reduces melanoma risk by 50%. And on a related note, tanning salons are pure, unadulterated schmuckery. They increase melanoma risk by 75% for exposure before age 35, and they offer zero health benefits, only accelerated UVA damage.
Next, let's address the crucial topic of medical avoidance. Starting with vaccines, which the book calls a high-impact, easy way to eliminate risk.
Vaccines represent one of the greatest public health victories in history. They have nearly eliminated diseases like smallpox and polio and reduced the incidence of measles, rubella, and diphtheria by over 99%. Yet we see entirely preventable outbreaks, like the serious measles outbreak in West Texas and New Mexico in 2025 that the book mentions, directly resulting from anti-vaccine decisions.
The risk comparison data is so stark, it's almost unbelievable.
Consider this for perspective. Your lifetime risk of dying in a car crash is about 1 in 95. The risk of a life-threatening allergic reaction to a standard vaccine is minuscule. 1.3 per million doses. In fact, if you compare the risk to common allergens, peanut butter is more than 450 times more dangerous than standard vaccines for children, based on the rate of life-threatening allergic reactions. Vaccines are overwhelmingly safe and effective.
And there's a new cognitive benefit associated with the Shingrix vaccine.
That's right. The Shingrix vaccine, which prevents the painful recurrence of shingles, has also been shown in observational studies to be associated with a statistically significant lower risk of developing dementia later in life, possibly due to reducing inflammation or viral load.
Next is cancer screening, where avoidance is the hidden schmuck move, putting off necessary checks because they are inconvenient or frightening.
It's an epidemic of avoidance. Nearly 7 in 10 U.S. adults are behind on at least one routine cancer screening. This is highly risky because early detection dramatically increases survival rates.
Like with colonoscopies.
Exactly. Colonoscopies lower the chance of developing colorectal cancer by a massive 40 to 69% and reduce the chance of dying from it by 29 to 88%. And given the concerning uptick in colorectal cancer in people under 50, screening should start no later than age 45.
And what are the essential checks for women?
Mammograms should be done every other year between the ages of 45 and 74, though some guidelines now recommend starting at 40 due to advanced cancers being found in younger cohorts. Pap smears and HPV testing are also essential preventative tools. Over 4,000 American women die unnecessarily from cervical cancer each year because screening rates are falling so dramatically.
Now let's address the one screening test, where the book's author, as a physician and bioethicist, takes a strong dissenting position based on the cost-benefit analysis, the PSA screening for prostate cancer.
This is where the ethical lens of the author truly comes into focus. He is openly and strongly against routine PSA screening for asymptomatic men. He even recalls how doctors forced the test on him multiple times.
And the reason is the deeply problematic benefit-to-harm ratio.
Yes. If the test can detect cancer, you think it's a good thing, but prostate cancer is overwhelmingly slow-growing. The vast majority of men who have it die with it, not of it.
So what did the efficacy studies find?
When scientists tracked PSA screening over 15 years, they found that it reduced prostate cancer deaths from 8 in 1,000 to 7 in 1,000, saving only 1 in 1,000 men. And crucially, the screening did not reduce the overall mortality rate. Men simply died at the same time, but from something else.
So men get the worry, the unnecessary procedures, and the side effects, all for no overall gain in total lifespan.
Precisely. The test leads to massive overdiagnosis. Between 20 and 50% of the cancers found would have been clinically harmless, never causing an issue in the man's lifetime.
But the diagnosis forces treatment.
Often, yes. Treatment like surgery or radiation, which carries serious side effects like chronic impotence and incontinence, not to mention a lifetime of worry and uncertainty, that stress is antithetical to wellness. So the author's recommendation is clear. If you choose to get screened, start at 55 and stop by age 70 or 75.
Finally, let's wrap up the schmuck section with 2 quick no-nos that span the spectrum from lethal to ridiculous: guns and cleanses.
Unless you are an active hunter, owning a gun makes you twice as likely to die by homicide, often at the hands of a friend or relative during a moment of rage or misunderstanding. And tragically, firearm deaths surpassed motor vehicle crashes as the #1 cause of death for children in 2019.
And on the ridiculous side,
Colonic cleanses, detox teas, and detoxing regimens are medical bunk. They have zero proven medical benefits and carry serious risks, including bowel perforation and even death from procedures like coffee enemas. Don't be a detox schmuck.
that brings us beautifully and with enormous relief to the second pillar, and the one the book argues is the most crucial for longevity and happiness. Pillar 2, talk to people.
This is where we need to slow down and really absorb the weight of the evidence. This pillar cannot be overstated. No amount of perfect diet, extreme exercise, or optimization of sleep can replace the necessity of good, deep, reliable relationships. The emotional and social wellness behaviors are paramount.
The evidence supporting this is overwhelmingly compelling, based on massive longitudinal studies that track people over decades.
The shining example is the Harvard study of adult development. It's been following participants for 85 years, including high achievers like John F. Kennedy, and the unambiguous, statistically robust conclusion: good relationships are the single strongest predictor of a happy life, healthy aging, and critically, longevity.
The current director of that study put it so plainly: good relationships keep us healthier and happier, period.
And this is supported by global data. For instance, the Chinese Longitudinal Healthy Longevity Study followed over 110,000 people. It found that frequent social activity, even simple things like playing mahjong rummy, was strongly associated with a prolonged lifespan and a diminished risk of functional impairments. The social interaction itself is the mechanism.
And this leads directly to the crisis of loneliness, which the Surgeon General recently highlighted. The aggregated data here is truly shocking.
Loneliness is an acute health threat. Aggregated data from 148 studies found that loneliness increases the risk of premature death by 26%, social isolation by 29%, and living alone by a staggering 32%.
We need to understand the mechanism here. Why is loneliness so deadly?
Loneliness is a chronic stressor. It elevates levels of cortisol, the stress hormone, which over time leads to chronic systemic inflammation. That inflammation damages blood vessels, accelerates cardiovascular disease, impairs immune function, and contributes to neurodegenerative decline.
So the stress response is what's doing the damage.
It's so severe that the risk of premature death from loneliness is comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And importantly, loneliness and social isolation are even greater risk factors for death among those under 65, which suggests younger generations are struggling deeply with connection.
Yet we are accelerating our retreat from connection. What are the depressing statistics on declining friendship?
It is a profound societal trend. In 1990, 63% of Americans reported having 5 or more close friends. Today, that figure has plummeted to only 38%. Furthermore, the percentage of Americans who report having 0 or just 1 close friend has nearly tripled to 19%. This loss of core support is a ticking time bomb for public health.
And the simple act of eating is now characterized by isolation.
Dining alone is a massive anti-wellness behavior. Shared meals are inextricably linked to social support, pro-social behaviors, and community trust. In 2003, about 1/3 of American meals were eaten alone. By 2015, it was over half.
And the most recent data is even worse.
The most alarming data shows that 25% of Americans now eat all their meals alone. That's a 53% increase since 2003. When we lose shared meals, we lose a foundational ritual of human connection.
So given that connection is so critical and measurable, how do we actively cultivate it? How many relationships can our brains even handle structurally?
For that, we turn to the work of evolutionary psychologist Robin Dunbar. He argues that our brain capacity limits us to about 150 meaningful social relationships, the famous Dunbar's number.
And within that number, there's a hierarchy.
Right. Out of those 150 acquaintances, you typically have about 5 closest friends and partners, and maybe 15 good, reliable friends you truly trust.
And that data on the time investment required to form a deep friendship is staggering. As someone with a job and family, I wonder how anyone achieves that 200-hour threshold.
That data point, which says it requires about 200 hours of meaningful, self-revealing interaction over roughly 6 weeks, explains why deep friendships are so rare. It requires intense, shared time, which is why college friendships often stick. It's a huge investment.
So for adults, achieving that density is difficult. The focus has to shift.
It shifts to maintaining the relationships you already have.
What are the practical, low-time investment strategies for maintenance?
Consistency beats duration. Maintaining a connection means checking in every week or two. The author shares a great, relatable anecdote about his relationship with his busy brother. Their calls often last no more than 90 seconds.
90 seconds.
They don't have long, drawn-out conversations, but they prioritize frequency and familiarity. They use a kind of family shorthand. That consistency, that showing up, is key. The brain registers the reliable contact.
Beyond close friends, the book also highlights the importance of weak social ties.
These are the brief, often transient interactions. Chatting with the barista, the Amtrak conductor, the neighbor while you're walking the dog. These interactions, even if they only last 30 seconds, are proven to improve your wellness and provide a measurable burst of joy.
They interrupt social isolation.
And remind us we are part of a community. The book also cited a study on British workplaces that strongly supported this.
What did they find?
They tested various wellness interventions for employees. Resilience training, stress management apps, sleep tracking, all of them were found to be worthless for improving employee well-being. But one intervention unexpectedly did work. Structured volunteering.
And why volunteering?
Because it enhances social resources and belonging rather than focusing on narcissistic, individual-focused psychological skills. It's the engagement with other people, the shared mission, the formation of those weak ties that proved beneficial. It confirms that human connection is a fundamental need that must be fulfilled actively.
But all of this social wellness is under siege from the modern technology environment. What is the biggest culprit that compromises both our social life and our cognitive function?
The smartphone? This is so critical. Studies show the mere presence of a smartphone, even when it's face down, silent, and not in use, reduces your available cognitive capacity.
Just having it there.
Just its presence. Part of your brain is subconsciously dedicating resources to monitoring that potential interruption. It steals your attention. And this tech environment has contributed to a dramatic decline in basic human function. The average attention span has plummeted from 150 seconds to under 50 seconds in the last 2 decades.
Which makes meaningful face-to-face interaction harder and less satisfying.
Exactly. And the actual use of social media only compounds the social isolation.
It's the great paradox, isn't it?
Social media is ironically named because it is intrinsically antisocial and thus anti-wellness. Spending more than 2 hours a day scrolling doubles the odds of perceived social isolation. For adolescents, the average is nearly 5 hours a day.
And the book calls this the opportunity cost.
Yes, The time you spend scrolling is time stolen from forming and maintaining real-life social relationships, which are the true engines of happiness and longevity.
That brings us directly to the third pillar, moving from social relationships to cognitive health. Pillar 3, expand your mind.
This pillar addresses the fear that many people genuinely dread more than death itself, losing one's cognitive self to mental decline or dementia. The goal isn't just to live long, but to remain mentally engaged and you for the duration.
The paradigm for achieving this lifelong mental engagement is Benjamin Franklin. His achievements after age 70 are simply staggering and provide the template for how to live a truly long and vibrant life.
Franklin was relentless. At 70, he sailed to France as an ambassador and, against massive odds, successfully negotiated French military and financial support for the Revolutionary War. At 79, he invented bifocals and a new design for a sea anchor. On his return journey, he mapped the Gulf Stream, which improved transatlantic shipping efficiency for decades.
And at 80, he was still inventing.
He invented a chair with a hidden stepladder and a special grasping arm for his library.
And at 81, he was the only founding father to sign all 4 key documents of the U.S. He was integral to the Constitutional Convention, arguing eloquently for compromises and writing one of America's greatest speeches on the power of consensus. He was sharp, engaged, and productive until his death at 84.
Franklin exemplifies sustained, vibrant cognitive function. To understand how to achieve this, we need to look at the neuroscience of aging, specifically the 2 types of intelligence.
Crystallized and fluid intelligence.
Exactly. Crystallized intelligence is your accumulated knowledge, your vocabulary, your vast knowledge base, and overlearned skills like typing or riding a bike. The book mentions the host's father recognizing a piece of Bach days before he died. That's crystallized intelligence. It's preserved remarkably well into old age.
The older you get, the more you know.
Your wisdom grows. But fluid intelligence is the one that declines and requires active maintenance.
What does that include?
Fluid intelligence is your critical thinking, your processing speed, your working memory, and the ability to learn genuinely new skills. This starts to decline significantly around age 45. This is why older people might struggle with recalling a new acquaintance's name quickly, or calculating a complex tip, or mastering entirely new software. The processing speed is slower.
So how do we forestall that inevitable decline in fluid intelligence?
Through 2 key strategies: building cognitive reserve early and aggressively pursuing cognitive maintenance later. Cognitive reserve is the strong foundation of brain connections you build early in life, typically through higher education and complex work. A high reserve delays the onset of noticeable cognitive impairment, pushing the age of functional decline from the 60s or 70s into the 80s or 90s.
And cognitive maintenance is the use it or lose it principle, but it must be applied correctly.
Precisely. You have to avoid passive activities like excessive TV watching, which makes the brain less active, and repetitive activities like only doing crosswords. Crosswords only reinforce existing crystallized pathways. To maintain fluid intelligence, you must engage in activities that are novel and challenging and use a wide variety of mental functions simultaneously.
So if I'm already fluent in Spanish, learning Italian might not be as beneficial as learning Mandarin, which uses a completely different writing system.
That's a perfect example. Learning a new language, starting a musical instrument, or engaging in complex, novel tasks that require planning and motor skills are key. The book offers a fantastic, accessible example, trying one new, complicated recipe every week.
I love that. Cooking a novel dish seems like a simple, low-stakes entry point.
It is a genuine wellness trifecta. Yeah. It engages the mind, right? Reading new steps, measuring, planning. It usually results in a healthier, less processed meal, which is pillar 4. And ideally, it's done socially, which is pillar 2. It hits all the high-impact mental needs: novelty, complexity, and fine motor skills.
Speaking of physical activities that affect the brain, what about sports? We've already covered the risks of head injury under pillar 1.
You have to avoid high-impact, head-smashing sports like football, rugby, and ice hockey. The risk of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, is just too high. A study on young deceased athletes showed a staggering 41% had evidence of CTE, proving the danger is not limited to older pros.
And what about managing existing physical health?
What is profoundly good for the heart is profoundly good for the head. Aggressive control of chronic conditions, diabetes, heart failure, and especially high blood pressure, as early as possible slows down mental deterioration. Data shows that individuals with 3 or more chronic conditions at age 55 were 5 times more likely to develop dementia later in life. So managing pillar 1 and pillar 5 directly supports pillar 3.
This brings us to the retirement dilemma. Retiring is supposed to be the ultimate reward, but the book presents complicated data on cognitive function post-retirement.
Retirement is, at best, neutral for mental functioning, and it probably accelerates memory decline for many. The authoritative Whitehall-Tallis study, which followed civil servants for nearly 3 decades, found that memory declined 38% faster after a person retired compared to when they were still working.
That is a shocking number. Why the dramatic decline?
Because the cognitive challenge, the necessity of solving novel problems, and the daily social engagement of a career are suddenly removed. If you retire into passive leisure watching TV or playing endless repetitive games, you are inviting fluid intelligence decline.
You must emulate Benjamin Franklin.
You have to. He retired from the printing business at 42, but then dedicated himself to decades of complex, challenging, and socially engaged activities: science, invention, and civic engagement.
So the lesson is, if you retire, you must immediately replace the intellectual and social stimulus of work with equally demanding and socially engaging activities. Take a complex university class, volunteer in a leadership role, or start that autobiography.
Otherwise, you risk becoming cognitively passive or a social hermit, which is the antithesis of the 3 psychological pillars. Now let's transition to the physical pillars, starting with the one that causes the most confusion. Pillar 4, eat your ice cream.
The name of this pillar immediately tells you that the focus is on simplicity and moderation rather than ascetic restriction.
Exactly. The problem isn't that we don't know what to eat. We generally know whole foods are better. It's that we are battling a social disease, obesity. Less than 1/3 of Americans maintain a healthy weight.
And the single biggest culprit is ultra-processed foods.
They make up nearly 60% of U.S. calories. These foods are scientifically engineered to be hyperpalatable, addictive, and calorie-dense. About 2 calories per gram compared to 1 for natural, whole foods.
The book outlines 3 major don'ts that offer the biggest return on investment for cleaning up the diet.
Number 1 is soda. This is the single easiest item to cut. 1 12-ounce can easily exceed most daily sugar recommendations, increasing your risk of diabetes by 20%. And crucially, we have to emphasize that the diet versions are often no better in the long run.
Why are diet sodas a problem if they are calorie-free?
They psychologically and biologically reinforce the craving for intense sweetness, which just makes healthy eating harder. But more compellingly, research from the Weizmann Institute found that artificial sweeteners like saccharin and sucralose impaired glucose tolerance and profoundly damaged the gut microbiome.
So they make the body respond to real sugar more like a diabetic's.
Exactly. In a striking move, they transferred the microbiomes of these participants to mice, and those mice developed the same unhealthy, impaired response to glucose. It's the disruption of the gut flora that seems to cause the issue.
The second big don't is snacks, especially routine, unconscious snacking.
Snacks contribute an astounding, often unnoticed 500 calories per day to the average adult diet. The single largest source of empty calories in the U.S. diet overall is flour and grains, typically in the form of packaged cookies, pastries, and donuts, which lack any real nutritional value.
So the goal is substitution.
The high-impact, simple goal here is to substitute those mindless snacks with fruit and nuts. Make high-calorie, low-nutrient snacks a deliberate, occasional treat, not a routine caloric intake.
And the third, ultra-processed junk food, which contributes nearly 60% of the average American's calories.
This is anything hyper-processed, like processed meats, sugary cereals, frozen prepared meals, and foods laden with added sodium and stabilizers. These foods are linked to higher rates of heart disease, obesity, depression, and dementia. Even many products marketed as healthy or energy bars, like Cliff and Lara bars, are barely nutritionally better than candy bars.
So the takeaway is just minimize them.
Minimize ultra-processed foods to about 20% of your total calories.
Now for the high-impact do's. What should we be actively incorporating into our diet to maximize those health gains?
Focus on fiber, fermented foods, and good fats. Fermented foods like kimchi, unsweetened yogurt, and kefir are beneficial because they significantly increase microbiota diversity and decrease systemic inflammatory markers, which protects against obesity and diabetes. A specific Harvard study found that yogurt was the single most beneficial food for weight loss.
What about the long-standing debate over full-fat versus low-fat dairy?
The book is clear. We can set aside the old fear of saturated fats from dairy. Full-fat dairy, far from being harmful, is safe for the heart and may actually reduce your diabetes risk. It is nutrient-dense, providing essential protein and calcium. The key health benefit of dairy is that it often replaces consumption of processed junk food.
Protein is often touted as the latest obsession, but the book suggests most Americans actually get enough.
Yes, the high-volume protein obsession is overblown for the average person. We should aim for 0.75 to 1 gram per kilogram of body weight, maybe slightly more after age 60 to combat muscle loss. The focus shouldn't be on total volume, but on getting enough of the specific amino acid leucine.
Why leucine?
It's the miracle molecule essential for triggering muscle repair, protein synthesis, and crucially, appetite control.
And this essential protein doesn't need to come exclusively from meat.
Absolutely not. The average American consumes 10 ounces of meat per day, which is excessive. The recommendation is to follow an 80% vegetarian goal. Limit total meat intake to 12 to 16 ounces per week. You can easily get all the necessary nutrients, including leucine, from eggs, dairy, nuts, and beans, without the added saturated fats and increased risks linked to consistently high red meat consumption.
Beyond what we eat, the book places huge emphasis on how we eat, linking it back to Pillar 2.
You should cook at home more. Trying one new recipe a week keeps things fresh, supports Pillar 3, and ensures better nutrition. But the most critical aspect, culturally and biologically, is eating with others.
The word companion literally means with bread.
That's the cultural root of shared eating. Shared family meals, for instance, are associated with measurable, better psychosocial outcomes in children. Less obesity, better academic achievement, and decreased risk of eating disorders or substance abuse. The eating alone crisis, with 25% of Americans eating all meals alone, is enormous for health and social connection.
And now, for the delightful paradox. The ice cream. Why does the pillar say, eat your ice cream?
This is the perfect example of forgiveness and nuance. A premium ice cream seems like a nutritional disaster, high in saturated fat, sugar, and calories. Yet the research, particularly a massive study following 2,500 people, suggests that ice cream consumption actually improves health metrics and is associated with weight loss and a reduced risk of diabetes and heart disease.
That seems entirely counterintuitive. How can that possibly be explained?
The exact reasons are still being studied, but one hypothesis is related to the healthy fat globules in dairy, which may help modulate metabolism in a favorable way. Crucially, the study found that eating half a cup of ice cream a day was associated with a lower risk of heart problems among diabetics and reduced odds of developing insulin resistance syndrome in overweight people.
So it becomes an occasional guilt-free treat, which helps prevent the stress of total restriction.
Absolutely. It removes the stress of needing to be perfect. However, there's a critical caveat to avoid the schmuck version of ice cream. Avoid artificial emulsifiers like polysorbate 80.
What's wrong with those?
They're added to cheap ice cream for texture, but they actively damage the gut microbiome and trigger systemic inflammation, making that product functionally similar to ultra-processed junk food. Buy high-quality, simple ice cream occasionally.
That transition leads us perfectly to Pillar 5, move it. Exercise well and regularly.
The most important takeaway here is that exercise provides the greatest possible return on investment. The biggest gains come from the very first step, simply going from completely inactive to some moderate activity. Being a couch potato is dangerous and exemplifies an anti-wellness lifestyle.
And the returns from that initial effort are measured in years of life, not just muscle tone.
Exercising as little as 15 minutes per day or 90 minutes per week is statistically associated with an extra 3 years of life. That is an incredible, measurable return for minimal effort.
We often focus solely on aerobic running or cycling, but the book insists on 3 essentials for optimal physical health.
You need aerobic, strength, and balanced flexibility. For aerobic, the recommendation is 150 minutes per week of moderate activity or 75 minutes of vigorous activity. But here's the nuance. Don't overdo it. The benefits strongly plateau after 300 minutes per week of vigorous exercise or 600 minutes of moderate activity.
I found that distinction important. Why is it framed as a warning against maximizing the physical pillar?
Because maximizing one pillar often means sacrificing another. If you spend 10 hours a week training for a marathon, you are sacrificing valuable time you could spend on fulfilling social or mentally engaging activities. Pillars 2 and 3 for only marginal longevity gains. Becomes anti-wellness if it breeds isolation or chronic injury.
And what about the strength component?
Strength training is non-negotiable, particularly to combat muscle loss or sarcopenia, which starts to plummet after age 60. In severe cases, people can lose up to 50% of their total muscle mass by their 8th and 9th decades. This loss increases frailty and injury risk.
But you don't need a gym.
Not at all. Bodyweight exercises like push-ups, squats, pull-ups, or even intense gardening work perfectly well.
And for balance and flexibility?
Yoga is presented as the simplest, most effective way to address both. It challenges proprioception and balance and helps retain range of motion. Even 5 to 10 minutes a day focusing on stretches and balance poses can keep you limber and prevent the catastrophic falls that are a major source of death and functional decline in older adults. Cross-country skiing, interestingly, hits all three elements at once.
For those motivated by tracking their progress, the book offers two surprisingly reliable physiological indicators of wellness and longevity.
First, VO2 max, which is the measure of your body's maximum oxygen consumption, is a powerful predictor of overall mortality, perhaps stronger than any other single metric. Unfortunately, VO2 max declines about 9% per decade, but the great news is that regular, vigorous aerobic exercise can raise your VO2 max to that of a person 10 to 20 years younger.
The second indicator is deceptively simple: grip strength.
Grip strength is inversely associated with all-cause mortality. The stronger your grip, the lower your mortality risk. This metric is likely measuring overall full-body conditioning, frailty, muscle mass, and even neurological health, rather than just hand strength. It's an excellent, simple proxy for overall wellness.
Finally, safety must be addressed, especially for those who fall into the trap of overtraining and ignoring recovery.
Safety precautions are critical. Always wear protective equipment like helmets, a 48% reduction in head injury risk when bicycling. Always warm up for 10 to 15 minutes, which reduces overall injury risk by 36% and helps the heart adjust. Cross-train to avoid repetitive motion injuries. And most importantly, do not rush recovery.
That's a big one.
For serious injuries like ACL tears, returning to strenuous activity before the recommended 9-month mark increases the likelihood of re-injury 7-fold. Impatience is a form of schmuckery when it comes to injury recovery.
That sets us up perfectly for the last pillar, which, like risk management and social connection, has a huge psychological component. Pillar 6, sleep like a baby.
Sleep is the foundation we often sacrifice first. Many people, especially high achievers, view sleep as optional, a waste of time. But sleep is absolutely fundamental to repairing the body and brain, and chronic poor sleep is associated with heart disease, obesity, diabetes, and even cancer.
And the immediate cognitive cost of acute deprivation is literally like being drunk.
Correct. Acute sleep deprivation, being awake for 17 hours, is functionally equivalent to having a blood alcohol content of 0.05%. Pulling an all-nighter is like being legally drunk at 0.1% BAC, leading to poor judgment, slow reaction times, and reduced self-control.
Here's where the importance of sleep truly shines: the long-term cognitive costs, linking back to Pillar 3.
Chronic short sleep, defined as consistently less than 5 hours, doubles your risk of dementia. Sleep is essential because it is the time the brain cleans itself. It uses the glymphatic system to wash away toxic byproducts or garbage that accumulate during the day, like amyloid plaques.
And it helps memory.
It also consolidates short-term memories from the hippocampus into long-term memories in the prefrontal cortex. If you skip sleep, you stop learning.
We can't simply will ourselves to sleep, but we can set up the optimal conditions for success, which the book details as the road to better sleep hygiene.
First, keep the room dark and cool, ideally between 62 degrees and 65 degrees Arif, as lower temperatures signal the body to sleep. Second, manage caffeine aggressively. Its half-life is 3 to 7 hours, so avoid it at least 7 hours before bedtime, as it blocks the sleep-inducing neurotransmitter, adenosine.
And the common nightcap, thinking alcohol will help you sleep, is also a myth.
Alcohol may help you fall asleep faster, but it severely fragments sleep later in the night, and it shortens the critical, memory-consolidating REM sleep. It diminishes overall sleep quality and should not be used as an insomnia cure.
And the fourth rule:
avoid all blue light electronics for an hour before bed. Blue light interferes with your circadian rhythm and melatonin release. Instead, read a paper book until your eyelids are heavy.
And what about all the sleep tracking apps and wearables? The pursuit of the perfect metric can cause its own anxiety.
Sleep trackers are often highly inaccurate, which creates a psychological trap. They tend to underestimate awakenings and overestimate total sleep time, often failing to accurately distinguish between different stages of sleep. This flood of dubious, anxiety-provoking information can lead to a condition known as orthosomnia,
Which is?
an obsessive, unhealthy anxiety about achieving perfect sleep metrics.
So the best measure is how you feel, not the numbers on a device.
Exactly. Stop staring at the clock. Trust your body. For persistent clinical insomnia, the book emphasizes that the safest and most effective first-line treatment is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBTI. This therapy focuses on changing the behaviors and negative thought patterns surrounding sleep and is demonstrably superior to sleeping pills, which often fail to provide genuinely restorative rest and carry dependency risks.
This has been an incredibly detailed deep dive into what is fundamentally a very simple message. The 6 pillars truly show the necessity of integrating the wholeness of wellness.
That is the ultimate unifying message the book delivers. Wellness is a lifestyle made up of overlapping, mutually reinforcing patterns. None of these pillars stands alone.
They all connect.
Exercise improves sleep. Eating a healthy, fiber-rich diet improves sleep quality by about 16%. Having friends over for a meal reinforces social ties, mental engagement, and healthy eating all at once. When all 6 behaviors are integrated into the fabric of your life, they reinforce one another and become automatic, requiring less willpower.
And the key isn't perfection, which ties back to the rejection of the competitive longevity mindset.
Absolutely not. The author's advice is mercifully clear. 90% is an A. You don't need 100% adherence to live a long, healthy life. You must forgive the occasional lapse like enjoying a piece of cheesecake or skipping a week of workouts due to travel. The biggest mistake is maximizing a single behavior, like pushing your VO2 max to the limit, at the expense of the truly core elements.
The core elements being the mental and social pillars, risk management, relationships, and mind expansion.
Yes. Cultivating social relations and staying mentally engaged are, by the evidence, even more important for a high-quality life than perfecting your diet or exercise routine. We must aim to be a mensch, which is to say, a person of integrity and kindness. Forgive your lapses and return to your routine, always prioritizing meaningful relationships and contribution.
The final provocation circles back to the very beginning of our deep dive. Wellness is only a means, not the end itself.
Longevity is worthwhile only if it's filled with meaningful relationships and stimulating, purposeful activities. As Benjamin Franklin advised, and as the book powerfully reinforces, don't make living forever the purpose of your existence. Happiness and health are the byproducts of a meaningful life lived in accordance with simple, high-impact principles.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner, who wants to put this knowledge into action this week? What's the single most high-impact contribution you can make?
We challenge you to shift your focus from optimization to contribution. Think like Franklin and ask yourself, what can I do this week that would be useful and helpful to the lives of others? Start that conversation, volunteer for an hour, or cook that new challenging recipe to share with a friend or neighbor. Health and longevity will reliably follow those meaningful, outward-looking contributions.